The world of cinema has been shattered by an unbearable grief as Diane Keaton, one of Hollywood's most luminous and authentic souls, has passed away at the age of 79 on October 11, 2025, in the quiet stillness of her California home, where her final breath slipped peacefully into eternity, leaving behind a hollow ache not only in her family's hearts, but in the soul of an entire generation who found themselves reflected in her laughter and redeemed by her unflinching courage. For more than 5 decades, she wasn't merely an actress playing roles, she was an entire era unto herself, a woman who shattered conventions and challenged what femininity could be, rewriting the language of love, pain, and beautiful imperfection through unforgettable films like The Godfather and Annie Hall that changed cinema forever. She was quirky, fearless, and endlessly human, the heartbeat of golden Hollywood. But behind that iconic smile lived a lifetime of solitude and secret sorrow that no spotlight could ever disguise. A woman who made millions laugh while she herself was bleeding in silence, carrying secret battles and a love that slipped away and loneliness that lingered behind every standing ovation. Born on January 5th, 1946, in Los Angeles, she grew up in a home where feelings were never discussed, where her father, Jack Hall, believed discipline was love, and her mother, Dorothy, once crowned Mrs. Los Angeles 1955, watched her theatrical dreams fade slowly behind the curtains of domestic life, while everything looked perfect on the surface, but silence pressed so heavily against the walls it shaped young Diane's very bones. She watched her mother's light die not in flames, but in slow motion, through endless small surrenders where applause was replaced by the clatter of dishes and beauty faded into exhaustion, and standing in the kitchen doorway at just 9 years old, Diane realized her mother's life was a warning, not a map, and vowed fiercely that she would never live that same life. While other girls in the 1950s dreamed of white picket fences, Diane dreamed of escape, of stages and scripts and lights, where she could finally exist as her own creation, and though teachers called her difficult and classmates called her strange, she wasn't broken, but breaking free with a quiet volcanic rebellion that burned from within without making a sound. Her salvation arrived in high school under trembling spotlight when she played Blanche Dubois and felt truly seen for the first time, realizing that acting wasn't just performance, but survival itself. At 20 years old in 1966, she packed her dreams and pain into a single suitcase and left Los Angeles for the brutal winter of New York City, arriving with nothing but 2 worn scripts and fragile courage, finding a tiny apartment on the Upper West Side where wallpaper peeled and the radiator coughed instead of warming, and she slept in her coat every night with her breath fogging frozen windows. She stood in endless audition lines only to hear, "Too tall, too strange," not the type, over and over while waiting tables where nobody remembered her face and singing in smoky basements for spare change thrown in glass jars, walking miles through snow to stay warm because she was too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to quit, sometimes sharing a sandwich with another struggling actress and laughing through hunger at the absurdity of still believing in anything. That fear and hunger carried her through 2 years of rejection until 1968, when the call came for the Broadway revival of Hair, and she auditioned barefoot and trembling but utterly alive, and when the director whispered, "Don't change a thing," something inside her finally cracked open, and the silence she'd carried for 20 years transformed into sound. The Godfather came in 1972 and changed everything, giving her not just fame, but the voice she'd fought for since childhood, and then Annie Hall in 1977 became the role that would etch her name into history, where her awkward laugh, her turtlenecks, and her unfiltered honesty weren't costume, but pure Diane, showing the world truth wrapped in imperfection. At 31, she held her Oscar under blinding lights, thinking she'd finally arrived, But when she returned home that night, she set the golden statue on her kitchen counter, looked around the empty room, and whispered to herself, asking if this was what it felt like to be truly seen. Success became a gilded cage, where each script carried the unspoken question of whether she could ever be that good again, and fame brought its own brutal weather as she worked until her eyes stung and hands trembled, memorizing lines long after crews went home, rewriting scenes nobody asked her to change because she admitted she didn't sleep anymore, terrified to stop moving. When Reds came in 1981, she poured everything into the role, until she had nothing left, remembering crying in the car after filming not from sadness, but from complete emptiness, like a candle that burned too beautifully to survive its own flame. And then came the inevitable slide when films like The Little Drummer Girl in 1984 faltered, and critics turned cold, and she felt herself slipping, even though everyone thought she was still on top. But the deepest wound came from love, specifically from Al Pacino, the man who became both her greatest joy and her most lasting heartbreak. A love story that began in 1971 when they met on the Godfather set, and she was 25 and radiant while he was 31 and unknowable, already half lost in his own genius. She was crazy about him from the start, and they shared something unspoken, a frequency only two lonely hearts could hear, spending years reading scripts together, driving through Los Angeles with windows down and Sinatra on the radio, cooking pasta on floors of tiny kitchens, and imagining Sunday mornings with newspapers and children who might have his dark eyes and her crooked smile. For Diane, it was love at its purest and most dangerous, unclaimed and undefined but absolute, and she believed that someday, when Hollywood's noise quieted, they would build something lasting together, a small house by the sea where love could finally rest. Through all three Godfather films, their on-screen story mirrored the one they were too afraid to finish in real life, full of intensity and yearning that never found resolution. And by 1990, when The Godfather Part 3 began filming in Rome, she was 44, and hope still flickered inside her like a stubborn flame refusing to die. They stayed in the same villa overlooking the city's golden light, sharing dinners on a balcony strung with fairy lights and laughing over memories that felt like promises. And everyone thought this was finally it, the ending to a love story that had waited 20 years to be completed. One evening, beneath the slow-falling Roman dusk, she finally gave voice to the ache she'd carried for 2 decades, whispering marriage or goodbye. In a voice trembling with surrender, the last prayer of a woman who had waited too long to be chosen. But his answer came not in words, but in unbearable silence, and she realized then that she would never hear the words she'd spent years waiting for. That night she packed quietly, folding dreams between clothes that smelled of wine and regret, and before dawn she stood by the villa window, watching the horizon bruise into light before leaving Rome forever. And days later, her father collapsed with a brain tumor, so that 2 heartbreaks arrived hand in hand and stripped her completely bare. Jack Hall had been her quiet compass, the one who drove her to auditions and said, "Next time, kiddo," whenever she didn't get the part. And losing him felt like losing the last light left on in the house, sending her into months of breaking quietly where she couldn't look in mirrors, and friends stopped calling, and the house grew haunted, not by ghosts, but by absence of sound. She went to therapy, not to heal, but simply to stay alive, facing the truth that love for her had always been a waiting room where she was never anyone's first choice, and she admitted that people don't realize what it means to feel perpetually unchosen. But from that rubble she did something extraordinary by rebuilding herself alone and learning to live without the illusion that someone would save her. In her 50s, she found a new kind of devotion by adopting her daughter Dexter in 1996 and her son Duke 5 years later, saying they saved her because she thought she was done with love until they arrived, and suddenly everything began again with tree houses and school lunches replacing movie sets and scripts. In her final years, she lived exactly as she always had, quietly and deliberately in her beloved Brentwood estate, valued at nearly $30 million, that she had designed and restored herself, a sprawling, sunlit sanctuary she called the Quiet House, where every tile and beam bore her fingerprint and gardens bloomed wildly with lavender and sage. On the morning of October 11th, 2025, California sun rose gently over Brentwood, spilling gold through wide windows of her favorite library room, where her daughter Dexter found her resting peacefully in her favorite armchair, with head tilted toward the window and eyes half closed as if lost in thought, a teacup still steaming on her desk beside an open journal where she'd been writing about love as she so often did, and when Dexter whispered, "Mom," the silence that answered was unbearable. The family released a simple statement saying Diane Keaton passed peacefully at home surrounded by light, love, and the world she built with her own hands, and they decided there would be no grand ceremony, just candles and soft music and words spoken beneath the trees their mother had planted. The news broke at dawn, and the world seemed to stop as headlines filled every screen. Fans left flowers and candles and black turtlenecks outside her gate with handwritten signs saying, "You made us brave enough to be ourselves," and Hollywood's greatest stars wept openly. Al Pacino, her once great love, released a trembling statement calling her "my heart's quiet mirror," while Meryl Streep wrote that she made vulnerability heroic, and Woody Allen said there was no Diane Keaton before her, and there will be none after. And that night, the Academy released a tribute reel showing her smile lighting up screens from Los Angeles to Rome through Annie Hall, Reds, and Something's Gotta Give, while her voice played in the background saying, "Love is the greatest risk, but I'd take it again." Her estate, worth over $100 million, was divided primarily between her children and the causes she held closest, including the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Women's Cancer Research Fund, and mental health initiatives she'd supported privately for years. And in sealed envelopes to Dexter and Duke, she wrote, "You were my lasting story," and "Don't sell the garden, let it grow wild. That's where I'll still be." In the end, Diane Keaton's greatest legacy wasn't measured in trophies or applause, but in the generations of women she inspired to stand alone without apology, in the homes she rebuilt from dust, in the laughter she left echoing across film history, proving that grace could be fierce, and kindness could be defiant, and even silence could speak louder than fame ever could. And her story was never about endless triumphs, but about endurance. The kind that rises after heartbreak and carries on after everyone stops watching and outlasts all the applause, becoming part of the light itself. The kind that filters softly through morning windows and forgives everything and never stops shining.